welcome everybody. Thanks for joining this panel on Mobilising Generation Numb, a radical rethink of people enablement in an era of uncertainty. So thank Josh and Olivia and Alex and the Sponge team for organising and hosting us as well. In fact, it's been a lot of work to get to this point, not least in terms of the research. So thanks very much for that. Thanks to you all for joining. So I'm Myles Runham. I'm the host for this conversation for the next hour and 15 minutes or so. I work for an organization called the Fosway Group. We're a specialist analyst firm working in digital learning systems, HR and talent, based in the UK and Europe. I run the digital learning segment of Analysis, and so the themes of this event are very much at the heart of my work. A lot of our customer research actually focuses on these themes and the challenge, I guess, and the opportunity, and we'll hear much more about that. I think it feels to me like this is a sort of thread of topics, or a fascinating sort of series of topics. As Generation Numb arriving, or it feels somewhat perhaps like it's kind of emerging. It's sort of emerging among us rather than arriving. And I think it feels like it's a sort of resonant and vital idea at a personal level for each of us, but also for organizations, and I think critical for learning and development as well, to sort of understand our effectiveness and the value that learning and development can bring in these uncertain times. I think interestingly, and I'd be interested to hear this theme from the panel and for yourselves in the questions in the chat as well. It feels like this Generation Numb is arriving at a time of kind of existential challenge for learning and development as well. There's a lot of conversation about what's L&D here for, how do we create value, how do we sustain that, and how do we demonstrate it as well. So I think those are some interesting background themes. Just as a sort of a little word of introduction from myself. In terms of the process, so we're going to have a conversation amongst the panel, unpacking the research a little bit and understanding the insights from each of the panelists, from their experience, what they find works, what doesn't, what's the context for them in their organizations as well. And then we'll turn to the questions and comments that you bring up in the chat, probably towards the end of the session. But please do use the chat to discuss topics with each other, to raise questions, challenges, etc. And we'll get to as much of that as we can at the end. We have from Sponge, we have the consultants James Gordon and Callum Goodwilliam are hosting the chat on your behalf, so should be well well managed and welcome there. So please do use the chat as we go, and as I said, we'll get to as much of that in the conversation and perhaps even afterwards as we can. So that's enough from me. You want to hear from the panelists. So I've just got a little moment of introduction before we get into it. So we have an excellent panel, actually, of I would say deep, broad and interesting experience from past histories and from current roles. So we have Laurie Niles-Hofmann here, who's a technology strategist, a learning technology particularly, founder at 8 Levers, who's a specialist in managing and understanding the challenges of large-scale digital learning transformation. Also the author of the recently published 8 Levers of EdTech Transformation, which is obviously a great preparation for this conversation amongst many other things. We have Josh Cardoz, who's the co-author of Generation Numb, and I think probably the engine of the research, I think, and the author of the whitepaper, who's the Chief Creative and Learning Officer at Sponge. We have Melissa Marts with us, who's a Senior Director of Enterprise Capability at the Coca-Cola Company. So that's looking after an audience of around about 70,000 employees. And Melissa brings not only that learning and development experience, but also senior roles at startups and product management as well, which I think would be some interesting capability and experience to bring to bear. We have Marshall Walker-Lee with us, who's the Director of Customer Education at Atlassian. So Atlassian, for those who might not know, which seems unlikely, but is the SaaS B2B giant, I guess, known probably best for Jira and Confluence products, so serving around 80% of Fortune 500 companies, and with a mere 300,000 customer companies, and I guess Marshall then many more end users as well in that purview. Also has a background in product management, but also in advertising as well. So some interesting perspective to bear. And also we have Jeffrey Fedak with us. I hope I pronounced your surname correctly there, Jeffrey. I apologize if I didn't. Hofmann, uh, um, who's a global consulting services and learning leader at Deloitte. So that's looking across a range of 250,000 employees. And Jeffrey's been at Deloitte actually for, I think, over 20 years. Is that right, Jeffrey? I think that's right, in various guises in learning and development, and including as a facilitator. And so has a deep experience both of that organization, that industry, but also of a range of learning and development activities and skills as well. So welcome to you all, and thanks for joining us. Josh, I'm going to ask you to maybe if you could kick us off, just to give us a bit of I suppose, a bit of a framework, the context for Generation Numb, the genesis of it. It's been, observing the response to the publication in my own conversations, and particularly on some of the debate on LinkedIn. It feels like that, the researchers voiced something that we've all known was out there, but haven't had a way of, perhaps a framework for understanding, haven't had the language to describe it a little bit, and hadn't sort of maybe stitched it together. I think that, the research has been very, very valuable in that context. But, maybe you could just talk us through a little bit of the background. Where did the idea for Generation Numb come from? How you, not a blow by blow account, but, how did the research emerge? But also, how did you sort of try and move us from research into action as well, which is a lot of what we'll talk about as the conversation develops.
Yeah, thanks, Miles. I think more than anything, what we tried to do with this piece is capture a feeling. And you're right in sort of seeing the reception to the white paper since its launch has mostly been nodding of heads and people saying, "I feel it too." And actually, the intentional language of feeling is really something that we resonated with. And so, to your question about where did this all come from? What was the process? I think we've all been feeling it in the workforce. And, certainly in the last few months to a year or so, we know what's going on in the world. We know what's been going on in the world in the last few years. And, we are in this particular moment where the mood music in the workforce is pointing towards a certain thing. And what we've really been trying to do in our research, in obviously speaking to our clients and speaking to all those large enterprise orgs that have to lead a mass amount of people through relentless change, relentless uncertainty, it was all pointing towards one thing, which we saw as numbness. And so Generation Numb, and we use the word generation not necessarily characterized by age stereotypes, but sort of a period effect that we've all lived through. And that period effect being sort of a post-pandemic AI future, AI first world that we're currently in. There's something very specific, there's something very special about this particular moment in time in the workforce. And what we really wanted to do is start a conversation, build a structure around what's going on with people at work and what's going on with our relationship with the work, our relationship with each other, and how do we bring people back to work, making them come alive more and, essentially have them stop feeling numb.
No, interesting. Thanks. And I guess it feels like it's one of the interesting themes of the research is sort of that there's these, not necessarily attention, but so perhaps the phenomenon of these sort of large scale forces that we all feel kind of acting on us as individuals and organizations, but also we feel it quite personally. So it's sort of it's sort of societal, economic, etc., but quite individual as well. How did you sort of pick on those themes? Which I'd love to hear from each of the panelists as well on that theme of personal relevance versus these kind of broader themes as well.
Yeah, perhaps I'll kick us off, and I'd love to hear other perspectives on it. But there's definitely, and once again, sort of like it's been quite exciting seeing the reaction to the paper because it often results in a very personal anecdote of this. Here's an example of someone I used to work with, or a family member that's going through this as well too. And part of the process was actually weaving together some of the cultural cues that we're seeing, whether it's navigating a poly crisis or whether it's, global uncertainty or whether it's about, very specific things like enshittification or shrinkflation or the erosion of wonder. We know there are these things that are happening in a personal context. And I say personal to reflect not even just sort of our day-to-day lives, but also what is really a new phenomenon of our digital lives and what that means into it and how that actually goes into the workforce. And so obviously, we wanted to bring that into, well, what does this actually mean for your day-to-day work and how you show up? And so I think quite naturally, whether you're a frontline worker or whether you're leading an entire organization, there is a very personal story to be found in this.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Josh. I'll come to the panel now. Actually, I'd like to understand, I guess, from each, we'll do a little bit of a sort of round table. Just, what resonates to you about the research? Obviously, we've had some conversations in preparation for this, but maybe Laurie, I don't know if you could kick us off, like, from what Josh has said, but also from your reading of the research and your conversations, what do you find most resonant and relevant for yourself?
I think for me, what I found most relevant, and I know it was a very, very small data point, but it was the scrolling research where it said the amount that people scroll in an average day is 300 feet. And being a Canadian, I have no idea what feet are. And then it said that's the height of the Statue of Liberty. And that just really hit home for me because I'm thinking of just that mindless feeding of information. And it explains, I mean, I do it myself. We all do it. Just sit there and scroll with things trying to constantly capture your attention and nothing ever does. And when I go into organizations and I sit in front of leaders and their teams and say, and we're going to embark on a transformation, that's what I do, ed tech transformations. There really is more often than not, very little reception to that. It just feels like another thing. So this research really captured not only how I'm feeling, but what I see when I talk to my clients, where there's just almost okay, here we go again. It's not going to mean anything. And yet we're going to do this anyway. And it just feels like people seem to feel like they're just being dictated from the powers that be. And it's sad, but it's a reality.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we can all recognize that sense of kind of powerlessness or lack of agency at times. I think, yeah, it's a really important theme. Maybe Melissa, if I could come to you next, sort of maybe building on that, or just, what was it that struck you when you were reading through the research and talking about it yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I think personally, definitely resonate with the doom scrolling and how it's easy to just numb yourself. I think the research for me, what I really appreciated was naming the elephant in the room and just directly acknowledging head on the cultural moment that we're in. I think it's very easy day to day in all of our work to be super focused on what's the business problem I need to solve? How am I going to design a great solution? And I think that's super important. But if we don't acknowledge that everybody's just feeling numb, are we going to end up with a strategy where we're just trying to be the loudest voice in a room of loud voices instead of actually breaking through the numbness? And I think that's what really struck me. And I think that the stat that got me is just the thinking about how much more change people have to absorb now than they did a few years ago. The number of massive organizational changes on top of all of the changes we're experiencing in our society and our culture is just too much for anybody. And like we hear that from our employees every day. It's just too much. So I think very excited to unpack what we do about that. But I think the idea of the numbness, it just deeply resonates immediately, personally and in what I see for our employees.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Melissa. Jeffrey, how about you? From your perspective, Generation Numb, what struck you about that, maybe that phraseology, but also the evidence that Josh and the team highlighted.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think a couple of the items that stuck out to me were digital overloading and kind of that chronic uncertainty, not just with what's going on with the economy and geopolitical things, but just what's going on with people's individual lives and their personal well-being. Uh, so that definitely stuck out. And as a learning and development leader, thinking through how I address learning needs within a business where people are having digital overload is is really important to do. And there's various ways that we can do that. But one thing we can't do is just give them more digital things to look at. So I think thinking through how we be creative about giving people those opportunities is important. Back in May, Deloitte launched a Gen Z millennial survey, uh, and it marries really well with what was in the Generation white paper. And I thought that was really kind of cool to look through and verify kind of different thoughts from different organizations. And to Josh's point, everyone is seeing it and kind of putting words in and putting a term to it. Generation Numb, I think, is super important to do.
Yeah, it's so helpful, isn't it, just to have some common language that we can use to discuss and describe these things. So, Marshall, then to yourself, how does this show up for you? What was it that grabbed you about this, or most resonated?
Yeah, the two data points from the paper that really leapt out and stuck with me were, number one, as Lori mentioned, just the volume of information as illustrated by that 300 feet per day of scrolling, but also the fact that the most common use of AI in 2024 was for personal therapy. I think that the mobile shift and now the AI paradigm shift have not only dramatically increased the amount of information, both signal and noise that we're dealing with, but they've also radically consolidated the touch points that we have, the aperture through which we take in all that information. So I actually went and looked at my own Slack analytics panel after reading the paper and found out that the Slack ecosystem I'm in at work has 90,000 channels, and it's about 2.3 million messages per month, which averages out to about one message per second, 24 hours a day. But it's not just Slack, it's the fact that I have Slack on my phone, and when I get a notification on my phone, it might be one of those Slack messages, it might be my children's school, it might be my wife, it might be an email from a friend. And as I reflected upon my own personal experience, I really empathize with all of the individuals that we're all trying to support and who are being described in the paper who feel like they just can't sift through all of that effectively. And I think it's really interesting to think about the various strategies we're all deploying to try to pierce through the numbness, but also, spark some delight and inspiration.
Yeah, and I guess it's interesting, isn't it, that one of the risks, I suppose, is that we have this sense of, this sort of very active, and frustrating competition for our attention. We need to be careful not to just join that competition, but we need, as you said, we need to puncture it somehow. Yeah, an interesting challenge. Josh, go on. Thank you. You very politely put your hand up. Thank you very much. Go ahead.
I was told to use good hand etiquette.
I do. I do appreciate that. It's the Englishman in me. I do welcome it. Thank you.
No, I was just going to reflect on Marshall's just sort of jarring stats. Thank you for doing that research. Wish we could have put that in the white paper now. But it's such a good example, and I think the part of the challenge of doing this body of work was really about sort of dipping toes in cultural, personal context and workplace context. And I think that's a really good way of sort of melding those worlds together because, I think most senior leaders, if not most employees in sort of a B2B setting, probably have email and some version of Teams Slacks on their phone, and it just kind of always goes with them everywhere. And this idea of digital overwhelm and this ultimately being the medium through which, to your point, Melissa, trying to connect, relentless transformation, the medium that we're using to then say, and we're going to be the best customer agency in the world, and we're going to win over this strategy in the next 5 years. There's something very numbing through the medium itself of being overwhelmed by just keeping up with your messages, which we all know is something that as leaders of teams, we struggle with in terms of productivity, burnout, all those types of things. And then ultimately saying still use that technology to enable the change or the extra performance that you're looking for within people. And I think there's something in there, especially when, someone comes and asks me, well, what am I supposed to do about Generation Numb? Why is this really important? Are we just really saying that people are kind of numb at work and leave it at that? No, it's tied to that next key transformation moment. It's tied to that next key change moment where you need to move your people from point A to point B. And this is a tremendous blocker for getting there.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Josh. I'm interested, Melissa, I'd like to follow up. But when you were tackling these issues in your context at Coca-Cola, what does Generation Numb look like? How do you know it's happening in the organization? How do you identify it? I mean, obviously, we've all described how we feel it for ourselves, but what are the signals that you've picked up on in the business or in the organization that help you calibrate it and understand it?
Yeah, I think it comes up a lot when we hear consistent feedback from all of our capability leaders who are trying to drive change, build skills for all of our people, that the number one feedback they get back from employees is like, there's too much. I don't know how to sift through it all. I need you to tell me what's the thing I just really need to do. I think the business uses the language of prioritization to mean the same thing. Like from our executive team down, the name of the game is we need to prioritize ruthlessly. We need to get really focused on the work that matters most. I think it's the business or the executive approach to the same problem, that We're feeling the numbness. We see it everywhere. The reaction to the overwhelm is a commitment to how do we do less better? But the start is to create some margin and to actually, create some slack margin. Like, how do we actually do a little bit less? But we see it sort of in the business language. We see it in the employee language. So it's coming from all sides.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. Jeffrey, I'd be interested to know in your context, do you recognize that, how does the leadership, what's the business kind of diagnosis of this? Is it well understood? Do you find yourself needing to, sort of convince people that it's a genuine issue that needs to be navigated, or, how does it show up for you?
Yeah, it's definitely noted in an issue within Deloitte and in other companies that we've had discussions with. I think what I take heart in, at least from a learning and development standpoint, is that one of the things that we are hearing is that individuals now, they're not just looking at promotion in companies, they're really looking at how they develop themselves. So if you go and talk to people, it's not just the survey we did, it was 6% of people are looking at getting to that leadership position. What they are focusing on is learning and development, work-life balance, ways to find more meaning at work. So I think by taking that and kind of changing the way that we are approaching how we interact with our employees, it's making a pretty big impact. So focusing on things like giving them space and time to do their own learning and development so they're not doing it outside of work. Things like the types of courses that we're providing, not just technical things, but are we focusing on those human-centered capabilities as well?
Yeah, thank you. So it's interesting. I think everybody's got this theme of time, slack, space. Just sort of removing the pressure feels like a really important part of the story. Marshall, I mean, in your context, what have you seen that starts to offer the populations or the audiences that you work with, however you describe them, to a bit of that relief of pressure or that kind of focus ability to to find some space and time?
Yeah, well, certainly for our business context, one of the big challenges that we observe is that we're seeing more of what I sometimes call passive adoption of our products. So customers are learning to use our applications at the bare minimum level required to get by. They're in essentially survival mode. And once they're engaging at that level, it's very difficult to convince them that they should invest time and energy in building new skills, and developing a deeper understanding, getting off that status quo. And so what we're having to do is really strip away some of the assumptions that guided certainly our program in the past, and I think broadly customer education programs industry-wide. We're no longer assuming that customers are going to devote time to education as a standard part of onboarding to a new tool. We're no longer assuming that customers can afford to spend 4 hours, let alone 8 hours or multiple days in training to adopt a new set of tools and applications for work. So we're having to go find them where they're struggling and deliver value in the flow of work to demonstrate to them that we have something vital that can support their goals. And then once we've earned some goodwill, we're able to hopefully convince them to opt into a deeper and more structured learning experience that will provide more value. But we just can't take it for granted that customers are going to come find the academy and spend half a day having fun with us.
Yeah. Okay, no, that's interesting. Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I think that sort of survival mode feels like an interesting expression of it as well. That you have to recognize and understand what's going to be motivating for people, what's going to encourage them to adopt, to interact. Laurie, I mean, you've got, I suppose, you have the opportunity to see this across a number of different organizations. When you're working with those businesses, what do you see as sort of signals of opportunity, or the kind of things that work in finding that space and making those connections with people, throughout this sort of numbness and this relentless competition for attention?
Well, this is going to sound a little strange, but I find that there's actually a paradigm shift as people are getting out of numbness, and I would call that cynicism. And that's usually transpires and when there's a bit of rebellion that's happening, and these can pop up in private WhatsApp groups or just conversations. And I actually look for that rebellion because for me, the rebellion is actually a signal that people actually care. They have something to say about it. It may not be what leadership wants them to say. It may not be aligned with that, but there's actually a passion that is piercing through some of that numbness. And so I actually proactively look for those people, and I find that harnessing them and talking to them about what is actually on their minds and what they actually are frustrated with, that there's a really interesting tension that comes there. It does make leadership very uncomfortable though, but I think you have to give that space and you have to give those opinions air, because otherwise it's just a one-way conversation. And most of the people who have those opinions are people who experience the pandemic differently, people who are experiencing the adoption of AI very differently, people who are experiencing geopolitical and economic issues differently. They're not sitting at the 1%. So if you want that change to happen, that tension point is very, very critical to listen to.
So in a sense, you have to kind of, not so much run towards the danger, is a bit probably overstating it, but you have to actively go to where you're seeing those sources of friction or tension or disagreement, or whatever it might look like.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so that because they do have something to say, and it's usually a very smart thing that is a blind spot for those in charge.
Yeah, thank you. I'm interested, Jeffrey, in your organization where, you've got how does that show up for you? Do you recognize that, sort of the value of attending to those points of friction? Maybe there's, the sort of the cynics or the protesters when there's a change initiative underway. It can be uncomfortable, I guess, because as Laurie said, from senior stakeholders might not want to give the attention to that, but it feels like a sort of valuable way of working. How do you navigate that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been at Deloitte for 22 years, and change is always inevitable at companies like this. And with there's 450,000 people within Deloitte, so change is very slow globally. And so what we see is when changes are needed, a lot of times we look at strategic areas where we try to implement things. So if we're hearing noise of things that are going on, so it's kind of to Laurie's point, we hear those things that people want. We try to implement them in small areas to try to develop pilots and kind of do a proof of concept and then try to roll those out. So that's usually the way that we try to implement those types of things. The other thing that we are seeing a lot, and one of those, we always try to look for metrics to try to prove our thoughts, is lower uptake on learning opportunities. And so also kind of to Marshall's point, people aren't wanting to spend all the time they want from a learning and development standpoint all the time. So as we're looking at non-mandatory types of learning, and the uptake is sometimes not as high as maybe it used to be. So kind of borrowing Marshall's thoughts there, because did spur something that in the flow of work is a lot of what we're doing now to try to put learning when people can actually use it while they're doing their job, so they don't actually have to go and do separate things. And then micro learnings are also kind of the wave of the future for what we're doing as well. So kind of those short bite-sized things. People just don't have the time, and they're not willing to take the hour or 4 hours, I think, as Marshall said, for sitting and enjoying learning.
Yeah, so you need to respect their time and attention whenever you get it. Melissa, I come back to you. I'd be interested to know, so when you were talking earlier about sort of finding those gaps and making, finding the opportunity for some space to sort of relieve the pressure. What's worked well in that respect for you in terms of, maybe to Jeffrey's point that some of these big themes and big initiatives, these are long-term changes, across the organization. You can't expect too much too soon, but, what have you found, that's useful to kind of make a start at least perhaps and start to relieve some of that pressure that you can build on?
Yeah, I think for me, and to build on the points multiple people have made, I think you do want to listen when there's friction, but you also just want to broadly listen. Like, start with a posture of listening and understand where your employees are at right now, what they actually really need. It might not be the thing you think they need at all. I'll give an example. We have rolled out in the last year, like a completely new way of working, fully embracing design thinking and everything we do in capabilities. And so this is actually a very big change for the 250 plus people who do capability work at our company. And the thing that we did was first listen to ask what they really needed to make their work better. And they told us, we need tools and templates. Tell us how to do the work so we can focus on doing the work better. And by listening and then just giving them and co-creating those tools and templates, that relieves the pressure that everybody was reinventing the wheel every single time on how to do the work. And then by seeing that we heard them, implemented immediately what they needed, and we could build momentum and community around the new way of working where people felt bought in from day one. And I think what we were able to do with that is create a pull model. So we haven't ever pushed out the new way of working. Instead, we started with a small group that we co-created with. We let them adopt the new tools and processes. They really like them, even though they're not perfect, because they had a say in it. It actually meets the need that they told us. They've brought more and more people in. Today, I actually on a town hall officially told people we have this new way of working, 10 months in. Almost everybody already knew. Almost everybody's already using it. And so I think it was a really great example of listening first, showing really fast time to value immediately, and then letting people be pulled in, because if you push out, you're just creating more noise, so you're adding to the numbness. But if you allow people to be pulled in, you're sparking something where they're like actively opting in, they want to be part of it. So we've seen that have a really strong impact, and it's a different way of looking at scale.
No, one of the themes that that I sense behind this research as well is that people in organizations just, quite simply want to feel seen and heard on a personal and individual level. But, telling them you've seen and heard them is no good. You need to show them that you have in those steps, as you were saying, so you can demonstrate some of the facts that, some of that, the fact that you've seen and heard them by doing something simple and immediate for them that can generate some of that momentum. I'd be interested, Marshall. I mean, you were sort of you echoed that a little bit earlier, I suppose, in sort of saying, trying to, be respectful of people's time. And do you recognise that sort of? I think what Melissa was describing there was almost sort of starting a movement without saying you've started it. But do you recognise that sort of a more, I was going to say stealthy mode? That feels a bit sort of suspicious and underhand, but quiet mode perhaps is more helpful.
Yeah, that certainly resonates. And I love to hear from Melissa that they're really embracing design thinking. I'm a big fan of design thinking strategies and user-centered design. And I think that, one of the key aspects of design thinking is building empathy at scale. So that's a capability we're trying to instill in our team members. We're investing in tools and people that really care about user behavior and user sentiment, not just clicks and views. And as a customer education team, we're really shifting our focus from being developers of content to being experienced designers with a real focus on building community-centric educational experiences. So care a little bit less about KPIs like course enrollments and course completions. We care a little bit more about metrics like customer confidence and connection. So really trying to understand, with a large and very diverse base of customers we're serving, how can we build the muscle of listening to them, as Melissa said, and then taking seriously what we hear and adjusting our strategies and tactics accordingly.
Yeah, interesting. I think there's another theme that struck me as well, is that and I think Josh, you described this at the outset, with sort of the deluge of digital signals that we're all creating and absorbing all the time, that technology kind of can be a little bit overwhelming in that respect, but we need, and perhaps there can be a tension, sort of technology can be the problem as much, and we've seen that, as you said, Josh, with the initiatification of the web has been well documented. But how do we reframe technology to use it to be able to scale those solutions, but find those signals that are more meaningful for people? I like that idea of finding confidence and connection, signals of sentiment rather than volumes of usage. I mean, Laurie, with you're well steeped in this sort of viewing the development of platforms and systems. learning and development platforms and systems not necessarily great as listening tools. So, how would you recommend that people help, try to use tools in the right way to, to gather those signals at scale without being sucked into just sort of volumes and completions, etc.?
It's a really tough one because we are in some ways handcuffed by the technology that we have. However, things are changing, and I think now that we're moving into sort of the agentic, the prompting, and having that more natural dialogue to interact with our content and being able to learn in that new way, we're actually getting a lot of robust data that we didn't actually get before, because now people have agency. They didn't have that before. It was sort of the agency was very binary, click or not click. There's nothing in between. Whereas we're now getting a lot more nuanced information about how people are using these types of tools, be it a Copilot or a Gemini or something embedded within their learning platform. The trick, though, is how do we also feed information back in that natural conversation? How do we train that agent to not feel artificial in the sense that it's pushing just like you would with an Instagram, story or reel, or at yet another tweet or yet another email coming to you? It's how do we harness that for a positive way where people can maybe challenge it in their own voice, or can maybe play with it and work with whatever message is trying to be disseminated. So I think there's a great amount of opportunities. It's just that sometimes we are handcuffed by the type of data that's produced. That said, there's a ton of other signals out there that you can also harness within your organization. I'll never forget being called in to do a transformation, and we looked at the top 3 search terms, and it was resignation, short-term disability, and how to report harassment. I was like, you do not need a learning intervention. There's clearly bigger issues at play, but we do need to listen definitely more.
Yeah, listen, I'd be interested in, I think some of the, I guess some of the clues and the set sort of pointers of direction that Josh highlighted in the research are very clearly, sort of analog, or they are not technological. They're finding space for people to spend time together and, and connect. Maybe through technology, but it's person to person interaction and connection that there's sort of feels like there's a real premium on facilitating that and recognizing when that's needed. Melissa, I was just about to turn to you and you put your hand up. Sometimes the technology is like magic, but go ahead.
Perfect. Yeah, I just wanted to give a quick anecdote about that, because we had a really great digital detox experience this summer. We wanted to essentially get a group of leaders, and we wanted to give them a very different 3-day skill building experience that didn't feel like just another offsite, another training, another workshop. And so we actually designed an entirely analog camp experience where we brought our leaders together. We told them to turn off their phone, turn off their laptop for the full 3 days. We printed everything. We didn't teach any content at all. We had a handbook people could refer to if they wanted. But every single thing we did to help them build skills in those 3 days were completely analog, application based. We did activities, we learned by doing. We actually left the office, we went to the aquarium, we went to a design lab, we did things that spark curiosity and new ideas. But I think more importantly, the analog allowed people to actually engage with each other instead of being distracted and twitchy and scrolling while multitasking. They were able to build really deep connections with each other and have enough space to reflect and apply what they learned, so that when we got to the end of the session, it wasn't that awkward forced moment where you're like, so how will you apply this in the real world? And you get the crickets. But instead, people talked for honestly hours about all the ways that they were going to go do these things differently tomorrow. And so I'm a huge proponent of just trying a digital detox, or taking a bold move to ask people to disconnect for a couple of days to allow that human to human interaction.
I do. I wonder as well. My sense, this may be my optimism getting the better of me, but my sense is that people are now increasingly looking for that. The excuse or the ability to turn off your phone, or shut your browser down, or whatever it might be, feels like there's more. I think we're more open to that now, and that's, we don't need to be nudged towards it. We need to welcome it. Marshall, you're nodding a lot. Is this something that, you're working with? Have you tried this? Have you shut down your horrendously powerful Slack fire hose and, to do this?
Yeah. Yeah, that certainly all resonates for me. One of the fastest growing pillars of our community and learning ecosystem at Atlassian is community powered in-person events. We're finding that even when we make it easier for customers to meet with us and with each other virtually, increasingly there's a strong appetite for highly inefficient IRL meetings that feel really enriching for people. And similarly, within our education programs, on the one hand, we're investing in this technology-powered, sort of hyper-scaled learning delivery where learning is integrated with AI, it's embedded into the flow of work, but we're also investing in human scale interactions where we're hosting workshops, we're hosting free public classes, and the demand for those experiences is far outstripping our ability to supply them right now. So I think we're all trying to recalibrate what it means to have lower friction access to a tremendous variety of high quality digital experiences, but still need some percentage of our time to be devoted to these experiences where we can really build interpersonal connection.
Yeah, interesting. It does feel I quite like this idea that actually maybe messy is to be welcomed. I think a lot of our digital experience optimize everything to the extent where, friction's completely removed, everything's optimized, you get exactly what you apparently want or need at the right moment. But actually that some of that mess and unpredictability, is actually welcome. That's where the learning can happen a lot. And Jeffrey, I mean, do you recognize this as well? Are you sort of trying to find ways of facilitating those kind of connections, welcoming the mess? I don't know,
Yeah.
that's my words, not yours, I realize.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think underpinning a lot of that is a focus on purpose. People want purpose, feel like they're part of something bigger. And by getting people together, I think you can really help drive purpose and culture. So at Deloitte, we have universities around the world in some big locations, and we get people together for leadership and development types of activities and different green space opportunities with clients where they come in and they just ideate on different topics. So I think getting outside of that normal day-to-day life and getting around a group of like-minded individuals can really help drive that purpose and culture and feeling of belonging. So I think we had 50,000 stays at our Deloitte University in the US this past year. And that's always one of the highlights of people's years, is getting together with people. And then the other piece around driving that purpose and culture, at least in the US or I guess globally, we have Impact Day at Deloitte. So getting people outside of their work and they go and work on community projects to help beautify a school or a park or work in a not-for-profit. So to Melissa's point, getting off your phone and going and doing something else and connecting with people who you work with and the community, I think is super important.
Yeah. Josh, I'd like to just get your reflections on this. That one of the things I suppose I don't want us to fall into groupthink here. We've got, Marshall, Melissa, and Jeffrey working in organizations that sort of, have that either welcome or support the scope for this kind of, for facilitation of connection, for finding time, etc. I'm not saying that it's easy, and they obviously work very hard to make it happen. But, from your experience of trying to, encourage that kind of thinking and working, how can, for those maybe who are in the audience who are in a different kind of organization, how can you encourage senior stakeholders or budget holders to try and think differently and work hard to be a bit bolder?
Yeah. First, just a quick reflection on a word that I think a lot about that Marshall used, which is friction. And there's something very convenient about today, about frictionless experiences, and anyone who works in the tech sector knows that that's probably tattooed somewhere on your body, about just effortless, frictionless UI, UX, and we've become so good at it. We've become so good at developing, and it feels like a goal that we are yearning for and striving for. And I think one of the reflections coming out of Generation Numb is that actually friction is a good thing. And friction is a necessary thing. And friction is actually some things that humans value. And so to the point of sort of technology sometimes being a double-edged sword, while we exist in a world of frictionless experiences and how easy it is for someone like Marshall to get a message a second on and be readily available and accessible, there's also, and let's call it purposeful friction, that I think we need to interject back into our teams and into our workforces of, to Melissa's point of, hey, it's not the most efficient way to work, or at least we think it's not the most efficient way to work, but let's put the slides and laptops away for the next 3 days and actually get to work and have that actually be a reminder that actually more valuable work can be done if we insert lanes, to Melissa's language, margins of friction that allow things to slow down, be messy, be more nuanced, which feels more human. And so getting that balance right between those things, and friction is just such a great word in for how to navigate it, is that we don't want a world where there's ultimate friction everywhere. We know that technology is a great enabler of that, but at the same time, we need to get the balance back. We need to course correct it a little bit back to know that where there's friction, there is actually a ton of value. And I think to your question about, how do we convince senior leadership of this, and what are we asking for out of senior leadership? I'd say the first thing is boldness. It's recognizing that this is a thing, and not recognizing that this is a thing that can be fixed with, a pizza lunch, or, throw in your favorite office meme about, what you want people to actually do. It's about radical listening, and it's about doing something about it that feels real. And, in coming together and bringing together the remedy of what we wanted to do with this paper, we were thinking really hard about, okay, but let's be honest, could you actually do that? Can you actually do that with 20,000 people, 30,000 people? And I think what we're hearing from the contributors today is that yes, you absolutely can. And it just requires a bit of boldness, a little bit of vulnerability, and also a commitment to just doing things differently, because numbness by definition is habituation to a stimuli. And if you just stay in default mode, and if you stay in the status quo, you'll continue to be numb. So having that courage, having that boldness, and also stripping it back to basics. There's nothing in the tactics that we offered that feels convoluted or even massive investments. And in fact, it's just kind of stripping it back to remember that people don't want to feel numb. And as long as you remember that, anything you do in service of that is building you momentum, and anything you don't do is actively working against you.
Yeah, thanks. This is going to sound like a terribly backhanded compliment. Well, let's see. But I think a lot of the recommendations in the research, I was looking at them and saying, well, that's just common sense, aren't they? But actually, as my father-in-law used to say, common sense is quite uncommon. So I think, let's recognize that, and just doing some smart, sensible things is a good start. I'd like to. We've got a little bit of time before we turn to questions. I'd like to just picking up on your theme of doing things differently, Josh. And this is to everybody on the panel, really. I think one of the things I sense is that not sense, because you've said it. So the traditional learning and development rollout of program and courses is maybe one ingredient, maybe not, but it's not enough at least, and actually needs something quite different. I mean, what's yourselves are all deeply experienced as designers and managers of learning and development. How have you managed that change for yourself, but also for your teams? That if you had to change your teams, change the capabilities, change the way they think. Obviously, Melissa, you said you're on this sort of starting or you're into this journey of design thinking. I mean, have you had to manage a lot of change within your own learning and development function, maybe managing suppliers differently, finding different suppliers? Interested to know. Maybe go ahead, Melissa. Sorry, I called you out, and then it seems only fair.
Yeah, I would say that we have fundamentally changed the way our entire capability network works, but we've also changed the purpose and goal for what we want them to do. I think previously we measured success quite a lot on how much you could launch, how quickly, what the completion rates were, the adoption that you were driving. Now we've aligned our entire global network on focusing on what behavior change can you drive that will create the greatest growth for our business. And so we've completely flipped the script on that. And we've also spent a lot of time talking about all the ways you drive behavior change. Maybe you drive behavior change by teaching someone something, but maybe you just give them a new incentive, or maybe you just create a trigger. You just insert something into an existing process, and that drives the change you need. Maybe a leader steps in and just tells people this is important, and you get that leadership air cover. or you just give people Focus Fridays back to focus. So we have really thought a lot about what is the holistic approach to behavior change, because we want our people not to just know how to do something, but to actually do something different. So it's been a very big shift in ways of working for us, but I think we're starting to see the impact, and it's resonating with people, and it's easier than ever before for them to find purpose and meaning in their own work and see how what they do as a learning or capability professional really does drive our business's growth.
Yeah. Thank you. I think it's really interesting, is it, that you sense that there is this shift, and we sort of introduced this right at the top, really, that the old ways, and not necessarily to disrespect them, but sort of building on knowledge and delivering knowledge is fine, but that doesn't get you to sort of to address these challenges fully, and certainly to encourage behavior change. I mean, for yourself, Jeffrey, I mean, you've been in the organization for quite a while. So, how are you sort of steering those changes for yourself in your role, but also, for your teams, but also, I suppose, the network of learning professionals that you work with? How are you trying to encourage or, sort of build on those kind of changes that Melissa was describing? What does it look like in Deloitte?
Yeah, I go back to a lot of the analyses and studies that have been done, the surveys, and a lot of individuals are looking for those experiences and those different opportunities that doesn't typically come with just a linear career progression. And as we worked on our strategy over the last couple of years, we are in learning and development. I think we were heavily focusing on the learning piece and not as much on the development piece. We were focusing on building out a lot of courses and e-learnings and that type of thing. And so now we're focusing more and more on experiences and exposures. How can we give people different ways of interacting with their managers or with people in different countries, different exchange or mobility programs, to give people a different way of learning the skills that they want to build and that we need at Deloitte. So that's one of the areas. And then the other thing that we're looking at more and more is peer-to-peer learning. So instead of us just pushing information from the center, how can we get more peers teaching each other how to do things? It makes it interesting, it makes it exciting, and you can add gamified components to it as well.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. Laurie, I'd like to get your reflections here. That part of the mix, I think, is probably looking to your supply side as well. Not every team can do everything. And so what would you advise for those who are looking to find services and suppliers, either that to sort of that work differently or encourage them to work differently? How do you think the sort of supply side of this equation is changing? Is it changing, and how do you encourage that change?
I don't know if it's changing sometimes, because sometimes, and I try and be the antithesis of this, but I do still see on the supply side, they are still trying to sell a vision. They're not going to tell you that vision, how hard it's going to be or how difficult it is to get there, because it erodes their ability to sell. So I think I'm looking for honesty. I mean, I partner with a lot of different vendors on the supply side as 8 levers, and I want that cynicism. I want that honesty. I want to know the reality. I don't want people who are going to tell me that it's going to be sunshine and rainbows. It's not. I worked with a really good partner, and one of the things that we did when we went into one particular transformation was just acknowledge that, like, this isn't a life-changing transformation. It's a transformation for how we do business. And I think just calling that out, that we're not looking for you to be, super inspired and find a whole new purpose in life and, learn to meditate and all of this. It was just really putting it into the perspective and the size that this actually is. That's really what I'm looking for on the supply side, is those that will acknowledge. And that's why I really love this piece. I think it just acknowledges the elephant in the room. There's numbness. This is happening. Those are the people I want to partner with. And those are also the types of businesses or vendors that I advise my clients to partner with as well.
Yeah. So watch out for those salespeople who are telling you what you want to hear, or maybe guessing what you'd like to hear. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, so I love this. I think we've got some I love the idea we've got sort of positive phrases emerging that we're not normally allowed to think of as positive: cynicism, mess, friction, effort, challenge. All these things are not necessarily to be celebrated, but to be recognized and encouraged. And I think, to your point, Laurie sort of talked about honestly as well. Marshall, I'd like to come to you in a second with this on this theme of how have you help to steer, your peers and your sort of organization in, in the learning and the customer education space. But I want to check in with the audience that in a few minutes time, we're going to go to questions. I must admit, I haven't looked at deeply at the very busy chat, but we've got some very smart people here ready to answer questions. So do make sure you've got a chance here before we wrap up in the next 20 minutes or so to ask them some questions. So please do fire them in over the next few minutes and ongoing, and we'll get to them. Sorry, Marshall, I sort of interrupted you before you started. But go ahead. How have you started to steer this change, and sort of welcome the mess and the friction, etc.
Yeah. Well, braiding together a few of the themes that the other panelists just described, I think one of the most positive changes I've seen in the industry, which is certainly true within Atlassian as well, is that the distinctions between scaled success, CX, community, enablement, customer education, I think are gradually breaking down. And increasingly, we're seeing them as flavors or components of a single effort. As Melissa said, at the end of the day, all of our jobs are to instigate the behavior change that will grow the business and support our customers. So inside of Atlassian, my boss, who's our vice president of community and learning, and I both shared a vision for years of bringing community and learning together. And we were able to do that about 3 years ago and formally merge the customer education, community, and customer advocacy teams. And increasingly, we're thinking of what we do as something that is broader or maybe just messier than traditional education. We try to radically apply common sense. I think good design is generally just common sense applied meticulously. And so if we know the behavior change that we need to see, then we're not thinking, okay, well, how do we create a traditional education program which will eventually get us there? We ask, what's the most direct, most effective, most delightful way to create that behavior change? And if the answer to that question is something that doesn't look exactly like a traditional piece of education, we accept that. We try to build the solution that's going to be most meaningful.
So you start with what I suppose confidence in what the solution looks like, or what progress looks like, perhaps, if you can't, maybe it's too much to expect the whole solution, and then move in that direction regardless. And do you on that? I mean, have you then at times had to bring in disciplines or expertise from beyond the normal boundaries of your work? Then as a result of that, you think there's a particular, I can't think of an example, but a particular direction you want to take, you don't have those capabilities to hand, you then look for I don't know, an agency in a different discipline or a partner in the organization.
We've certainly worked with many great external partners. We've also wholesale transformed our own workforce. And some of this might just be my own personal preference. I have a kind of heterodox way of thinking generally, but I also came from a background in, as you mentioned, advertising and product development. So when I started working in customer education, generally there were instructional designers, and then there were a handful of program managers or operational specialists. And those were the two primary professional tracks. And in the past 4 or 5 years, we really looked to other disciplines and other industries when we're hiring. So we're hiring strategists who come from the world of consulting. We're hiring product managers. We're hiring visual designers, and we're teaching them how to do good instructional design, but then they're able to flex a different muscle, think in a different way. And that's really supported not only the transformation of our programs, but I think really re-energizing our team and helping the customer education group at Atlassian see a whole new set of opportunities for how we can work, how we can deliver value.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I suppose for what you were saying, Jeffrey, earlier, that this is learning and development is more than just the L word. There's a D word there as well, and that's development to a purpose, as you were describing. But in your experience, Jeffrey, have you done that as well? Because you're in an interesting organization that has all sorts of consulting and advisory capability, obviously at a huge scale. I mean, are you able to draw on that to bring that to sort of physician heal thyself kind of thinking? Is it or is that just massively simplistic?
No, absolutely. Yeah, we bring in people from all different parts of the business to help with learning, from subject matter resources that can help our instructional designers and our program managers to having gigs. So we open up 2-3 week gigs where people from the business can apply to come and help with certain projects, just so they can get some insights and experience with what's going on with learning and development. So yeah, I think bringing in those diverse perspectives is incredibly important to make learning as impactful as it can be. I think, yeah, I'm looking at the chat here with someone mentioned good design is common sense applied meticulously, which was Marshall's quote there. Completely agree. And I think sometimes we get in our way within our learning and development teams based on we've done these things this way for so many years. I think getting diverse perspectives from the business to come in and say what really works and what they need is very important.
Yeah, yeah. No, I love the chat. It's a great source of quotes. I'm very glad I'm hosting and not participating. I think my quote game is nowhere near as sharp as this. So we're moving into the questions now, folks. So do put in the questions that you'd like to ask. I mean, I guess from the panel as well. And if there are things that you've heard that you want to ask each other, go ahead as well. Josh, I mean, I think I'd be interested to know that one of the threads, or I suppose perhaps the prime mover of the research, is really to summarize and identify these themes and explain and describe them, but to encourage action. So if you are thinking about where does that action start for people, thinking again, perhaps for others in the audience who might not be in a position to have made a start, what does a good start that looks like it could sustain some momentum and loosen things up and create some of that space, what might that look like, or what have you seen it look like?
Well, I'll give the advice I give our own clients to myself, because that's probably a good best practice, and that is start with what the business values. And I think it's very easy to negate this concept and this message and put it to the side and say, I'm too busy trying to get my job done to care about Generation Numb. And something that my co-author Olivia and I were really insistent on communicating is that this is the job. This is your job. Everyone is a change leader. And your job is, how are you going to shift your people to where you need them to be, knowing that this is what's getting in their way. And so there's something that is easy to push this message aside if you don't take it seriously. But when you look at it through the context of relentless change, failed strategy execution, the stat that always sticks to me is the one about just the amount of enterprise-wide change someone has seen in 2016 versus 2024, moving from 2 events to 12 events. Actually, it's probably more than that. That's a lot. That's a lot to put on people's plates. That's a lot to ask for people. And, to Melissa's point about, and let's not also forget, we know what the price of bread is right now. And we also know that people's job security is at risk. And, and there's a lot that people need to bring to work on their shoulders that us as leaders, as caretakers, custodians of an organization need to take seriously. And not taking it seriously is everything from it being turned into your competitive strategic advantage to potentially being that piece that doesn't make you survive tomorrow. So the business leader in me actually looks at this as a very serious challenge that says, if I don't sort this out, I have no idea where my business is going to be relatively soon, especially for those where humans are at the center of your value creation.
It's interesting, isn't it? I think from what you were saying is almost some of those things that people will bring to conversation that you bring to work with you. So like just cost of living. It's a big theme in the UK, I think throughout the Western world, actually, cost of living crisis, etc. That comes to work with people. You can't, and I guess one of the things that project managers might do is say, well, that's out of scope, but what you're saying, you can't wish the cost of living out of scope, because how does that work? So you kind of have to listen to those signals.
That's actually a good sort of, and the infographic in the piece is a good example of out of scope versus in scope. And I think sometimes, at least for those that don't want to take numbness seriously, you tend to just kind of work with the individual right in the middle, but you have to see an individual for everything they bring to work and who they bring. That's who we are as people. You can't ignore the mood music. And from, something else we talk a lot about, I'm very passionate about, is stop hiding behind your vision and your purpose. Those days are gone. those days of, getting people being, hyper rationally motivated by just, oh, well, I'm so excited about our customers. Sure, for maybe the 1% of your population, but what about the rest? And that's why we've broken down the remedy into a me, us, it framework, because it's sequential. You need to move from one to the other. And if you don't address personal needs, if you don't have that, here's some templates because you asked for them, or if you don't have that, well, here's the balance of an in-person workshop with all the digital access that we're giving to you, then you're not really moving the needle that you think you are on that key transformation.
Yeah, I remember on the point of values, I remember when I worked at the BBC, someone took the decision to post the BBC corporate values on the inside of the toilet doors. It was like, oh, now we're in trouble. This is like, if this is not a sign of a positive transformation to come. I think your point as well, that you put in the chat there, Marshall, yet another transformation. You feel if there are that many, then transformation is probably the wrong word. If you're on your fifth, then transformation is just not an accurate description of what that activity produced. I've had a question from Mina about who's interested in this idea of kind of community powered events. I think perhaps you were describing some of this, Melissa, in your camp experience. I mean, I'd be interested to know what does Mina would like to know what does that look like? Perhaps like how do you know it's happening? I don't know if anybody particularly wants to take that on. I don't, Melissa, you might be able to build on that experience, or if anyone has some thoughts there. Laurie, you were nodding. I don't know. Maybe I'm just picking on you.
No, I mean, it's hard to measure these things, right? Like that's always very, very difficult. I think it's because you need to identify at the onset what the purpose is of what you're actually trying to do in order to be able to create that measurement. But maybe sometimes we can just be okay with that. We can, again, we've talked about messy and friction and tension. Maybe we can be okay that not everything has to have a numeric goal to it, and maybe it's something that is more organic and deeper. Those would be my thoughts on that, because we've been trying to prove this since time began. One friendly challenge, though, that I would do is when we are talking about some of these in-person events and whatnot, just making sure that they're inclusive. Not everyone can leave their family for 3 days. Not everybody can travel. If they can have obligations with family, that they may take care of parents, kids, whatever. So also appreciating that and making that a part of those types of events, I think, is also very critical. Otherwise, you've added a tax.
Yeah, it's a good point, isn't it? It's very easy to make the assumption that these things, it's sort of one, I suppose, that kind of classic phrase, one size fits all, and it might not know, it could well not do. I'd be interested maybe either from Marshall or Jeffrey, this theme of what, what does a good community event or community activity look and feel like in your organizations? So how do you ignite it, or how do you support it?
Yeah, I can answer, looking through the lens of external customer education. So we've long had a vibrant community at Atlassian that's active in our online forums, but is also interested in hosting peer-led events. And, over time, we've built up an infrastructure that's actually made it tremendously efficient and low cost to support those events. Essentially, we are reimbursing people for pizza and beer. And we don't govern what they talk about. We offer support if they ask for it, but we mostly try to stay out of the way and recognize and honor the expertise that's in our community. And we've actually up-leveled that in the past few years. We've identified a group of community members who we think are doing an especially excellent job creating educational or quasi-educational materials and delivering them to the community. So we've given them a special status and allowed them to actually develop and deliver public training through our official Atlassian customer education channel. So more and more, we really see our customers, our community members, as peers or extensions of our team. And the best case scenario is the community is moving so quickly towards action that you're really not able to monitor or police what they're doing. And I think the signal that you pay attention to make sure that it's growing in a healthy way is that the behavior change that you're seeing downstream from these community activities aligns with the behavior change that you're trying to instigate through your official programs.
Oh, Great, thank you. Thanks. Well, we've got a few minutes left now. I think what I'd like to do, actually, maybe, and this is for each of you, just if there's a single thought or message or message of encouragement to the audience, or to navigate numbness, puncture it, find the space, the boldness and ambition, etc. What do you think's the one thought that you would recommend people to take from this session, and maybe pursue further, as a sort of, I suppose, a summary point? Josh, I'm going to come to you first because you wrote the research, and I'll give the others a little bit more time to consider their final remark.
I, 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 as someone who's been playing with these concepts for a while, white paper aside, and trying to be part of the moment or the resistance of tackling numbness in the right way, I think my only advice would be, don't be surprised how quickly you will get people on board by doing the very simple things that you can commit to. And anytime we have tried to do something that feels like we're combating numbness, it has almost unequivocally been received positively. You'll never find someone who doesn't want to be numb. So just remember, you've got that working in your favor.
Great, thank you. Jeffrey, I'm going to come to you next. What's your wrap-up remark, reflection?
Yeah, I would say we've used the word listen a lot. I think listen, look at the survey results, look at any data that you can get. And one thing that I think stands out there is that individuals are craving for learning and development, but specifically around a lot of those softer skills. And I think a lot of times we focus so much on the technical things of AI and those types of things that we forget to focus again on those enduring human capabilities like curiosity, resilience, emotional intelligence that are going to be the cornerstone for a lot of what we do in the years going forward.
Yeah, great point. Thank you. Melissa, how about you? What do you like to share as a reflection, a summary reflection?
Yeah, I think we all work for really big organizations and scale is top of mind. But my final reflection would be start by doing something really bold that like really breaks through the numbness and creates surprise and delight for a small group where you have the space and the permission to like really play or try something different. And then you can create momentum around that instead of, I think the instinct for all of us is like, how will that scale? How can I do something at scale? But I think to break through the numbness, like being super bold with a small group first, the scale will come.
Right. Yeah, thank you very much. Marshall, to you next.
Yeah, maybe have two. I'll start with this maybe slightly more controversial one. I'm a big fan of data, but I'm also a big fan of intuition. And so I think that it's important to preach what you yourself practice or would practice. So if you notice that you're planning, developing, delivering programs that you yourself would not be interested in consuming and participating in because they're too time intensive, because they're too complex, because they're too low friction, you should honor that intuition and think about what it would mean to build something that your team members would actually be excited to get engaged with. And then maybe the slightly less controversial paired take is lean into delight. As Melissa said, like start with a small group, but be bold. It's easy for us to gradually over time work our way into ruts where we forget that one of the most important tools in our toolbox is our ability to really get people excited. And it might mean doing things differently, but that can be a really powerful tool to use to break through the numbness.
Great, thank you very much. So to you, Laurie, if you can take us home with your final reflection.
No pressure at all.
No, exactly.
Examine your own numbness. Where are you on the scale? What are you doing that's numbing you? And where does that sit? And I think also too, to echo on some of the other points, I hate using the term learners. They're your colleagues. They're people. Where there's no top down. You're not. It's not a teacher-student relationship. And I think that sometimes evolves in when we talk about corporate education, and it shouldn't be. These are peers. So design for that. Think of that. Think that they are people just like you, and use that as your litmus test for what to implement.
Yeah, it's a great point to conclude on. I guess, as everybody said, we all recognize these symptoms and the causes of them as personally as much as we do in our professional and organizational lives as well. Thank you. Well, thanks everybody. It's been a fascinating conversation. Excellent contributions from all the panel. A lovely, rich set of comments in the chat as well. So thank you very much to Jeffrey, Marshall, Melissa, Laurie, and Josh for joining us. It's been a fascinating discussion for me. It's been an honour to try and help steer it as well. So thanks folks for joining us. Thank you for your time and your contributions, and thanks to Sponge for organising and hosting as well. And a good day from wherever it takes you next as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you.